2,400 years ago, Plato told a story about prisoners chained in a cave, mistaking shadows on the wall for reality. They couldn't see the fire casting those shadows, couldn't turn their heads to glimpse the outside world. When one prisoner finally broke free and saw sunlight, he returned to tell the others, and they attacked him for threatening their comfortable illusions. Replace the cave with a cubicle, replace the shadows with spreadsheets and performance metrics, replace the chains with mortgages and health insurance. The allegory becomes disturbingly contemporary. Albert Camus, writing in the 20th century, saw something equally troubling. He watched office workers pour onto the streets of Paris each evening and wondered, what separates the modern worker from Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity? Both perform endless repetitive tasks that reset each day. Both labor under the weight of necessity. Both might ask, is this really living, or just an elaborate form of dying? The difference, Camus argued, lies in consciousness. Sisyphus could choose to find meaning in his rebellion against the absurd. But what happens when the workers never even realize they're pushing the boulder? We're told we live in a meritocracy where career paths reflect our choices and abilities. Pick your major, choose your profession, climb the ladder. But examine this choice more closely and a different picture emerges. Most career options require similar structures, showing up at designated times, following someone else's priorities, trading hours for money regardless of productivity or personal rhythm. Whether you're an accountant, a marketing coordinator, or a middle manager, the fundamental dynamic remains identical. Your time belongs to someone else. This creates what economists call constrained optimization. You're free to choose your own prison cell, just not whether to be imprisoned. Here's the psychological genius of the modern work system. It teaches us to measure our worth in hourly increments. Salary negotiations become discussions about how much someone else's time is worth. Promotions mean earning the right to sell more of your life at a higher rate. But time is the one resource that's genuinely non-renewable. Unlike money, which can be earned again, each hour you trade away is gone forever. The wealthy understand this instinctively. They buy other people's time rather than selling their own. The system inverts this wisdom. It convinces the majority to trade their irreplaceable hours for replaceable currency, while the few accumulate both time and money by owning the structures that facilitate this exchange. Once you're inside the system, escape becomes psychologically and practically difficult. Benefits tie you to employers. Mortgages require steady paychecks. Health insurance depends on full-time status. Each year of participation makes leaving feel more impossible. This isn't accidental. The system is designed to create dependency. Consider how employer-sponsored health insurance emerged during World War II as a way to attract workers during wage freezes. What began as a competitive advantage became a tool of control. Workers couldn't risk losing coverage for themselves or their families. The golden handcuffs get tighter with every promotion, every benefit upgrade, every year closer to retirement. You're not just working for today's paycheck. You're trapped by yesterday's commitments and tomorrow's fears. Modern workplaces have perfected the art of monitoring productivity without appearing oppressive. Timesheet software tracks every minute. Email systems log response times. Performance metrics quantify human effort into neat spreadsheets. This creates what sociologist Shoshana Zuboff calls instrumentarian power, the transformation of human behavior into data points for optimization. You're not just selling your time, you're selling your autonomy, your spontaneity, your right to determine how and when you work most effectively. The psychological impact is profound. When every action is monitored and measured, workers internalize surveillance. They begin monitoring themselves, optimizing their behavior for metrics rather than meaningful outcomes. The overseer becomes unnecessary. The prisoners watch themselves. Perhaps the most insidious mechanism is how thoroughly we've normalized this arrangement. We speak of work-life balance as if work and life are naturally separate domains, rather than questioning why work consumes such a disproportionate share of our conscious hours. We've accepted that most people will spend their prime adult years in jobs that drain rather than energize them, following orders rather than pursuing their own creative visions. We call this maturity, responsibility, realism. But what if it's actually learned helplessness on a civilizational scale? Psychologist Martin Seligman's experiments showed how subjects who experienced inescapable stress eventually stopped trying to escape even when escape became possible. They had learned that their actions didn't matter. The modern work system teaches similar lessons. Individual workers feel powerless to change their conditions. Union membership has declined. Worker protections have eroded. The message becomes clear. Accept what you're given. Be grateful for employment. And don't ask too many questions about whether this arrangement serves your actual interests. Have you ever found yourself defending a job that makes you miserable simply because it provides stability? Have you noticed how conversations about work rarely question the fundamental structure, only how to optimize your position within it? These responses reveal how deeply we've internalized the logic of our own captivity. Camus believed the first step toward authentic freedom was recognizing the absurdity of our condition. Only when we see the boulder for what it is, can we begin to choose how we'll push it, or whether we'll push it at all. But awareness alone isn't enough. We need to understand how this system developed, who benefits from it, and what evidence exists that alternative arrangements are not only possible, but often more productive and humane. In 1926, Henry Ford made an announcement that would reshape civilization. The Ford Motor Company was adopting a 40-hour work week. History books celebrate this as progressive labor reform, but Ford's own words reveal a different motive. It is high time to rid ourselves of the notion that leisure for workmen is either lost time or a class privilege, Ford declared. But he wasn't advocating for worker freedom. He was engineering a more efficient form of control. Ford had discovered something crucial about industrial capitalism. Workers needed enough free time to become consumers, but not enough to develop alternative ways of living. 40 hours was the sweet spot, enough time to rest and spend wages on Ford's products, but not enough to pursue meaningful alternatives to wage labor. The 40-hour week also standardized human energy extraction. Instead of allowing workers to follow natural rhythms of productivity and rest, it created predictable, measurable units of labor that could be optimized and scaled across entire industries. This wasn't worker liberation. It was the birth of what sociologist Pierre Bourdieu would later call temporal discipline, the systematic colonization of human time by economic imperatives. After World War II, government policies deliberately created what we now recognize as the suburban middle-class lifestyle. The GI Bill, federal housing loans, and highway construction weren't just economic stimulus. They were social engineering projects that locked families into consumption patterns requiring steady employment. Suburbanization separated work from home, making car ownership necessary. Houses in suburban developments required mortgages that demanded decades of consistent income. The geographic isolation of suburban life made community self-sufficiency nearly impossible. Everything required money, and money required jobs. Veterans returning from war, many of whom had experienced different models of cooperation and shared purpose, found themselves channeled into individual nuclear families dependent on corporate employment. The social solidarity that might have challenged existing power structures was dissolved into private property ownership and consumer debt. This created what urban planner James Howard Kunstler calls the geography of nowhere, spaces designed to maximize economic dependency rather than human flourishing. Once locked into mortgages and car payments, workers had little choice but to accept whatever employment conditions were offered. In 2019, the World Health Organization officially recognized burnout as an occupational phenomenon, defined as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. But this clinical language obscures a damning reality. Our work systems are systematically damaging human mental health. Research published in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology found that 76% of employees report experiencing workplace burnout, with 28% describing themselves as very often or always burned out. These aren't isolated personal failures. They're predictable outcomes of systems designed to extract maximum value from human energy, without regard for human well-being. Here's where the economic mythology of modern work completely collapses. According to OECD data from 2020, worker productivity in developed nations has increased by approximately 70% since 1979. while wages for typical workers have grown only 12% over the same period. Let that sink in. Workers are producing dramatically more value, but receiving an ever smaller share of what they create. The benefits of increased productivity flow almost entirely to capital owners, rather than the people actually doing the work. This data reveals the fundamental lie at the heart of the modern work bargain, that hard work and increased productivity will translate into improved living standards for workers. Instead, we see what economist Thomas Piketty calls patrimonial capitalism, a system where ownership of assets matters far more than productive labor. Between 2021 and 2022, over 47 million Americans quit their jobs voluntarily, the highest resignation rate on record. Mainstream media frame this as worker laziness or unrealistic expectations, but exit interviews and surveys revealed something different. People were rejecting work arrangements that felt dehumanizing and meaningless. Research from MIT Sloan found that the top predictors of resignation weren't salary issues, but toxic work culture, job insecurity and reorganization, and high levels of innovation that required constant adaptation without corresponding increases in autonomy or decision-making power. The Great Resignation represented a collective recognition of what Camus called the absurd, the disconnect between human needs for meaning and dignity, and systems that treat people as replaceable input costs. Martin Seligman's experiments with dogs revealed how creatures can learn to accept painful conditions, even when escape becomes possible. The dogs that had experienced inescapable electric shocks eventually stopped trying to escape, even when barriers were removed. Modern work culture creates similar psychological conditioning. Workers experience years of having their schedules, priorities, and methods determined by others. Even when opportunities for alternative arrangements arise, remote work, freelancing, entrepreneurship, many people find themselves psychologically unable to pursue them. The system trains us to seek permission rather than take initiative, to optimize within constraints rather than question the constraints themselves. We become, in Seligman's terms, helpless, even when we're not actually powerless. Once people invest significant time and energy in career paths, abandoning those paths feels like admitting failure, even when the paths clearly aren't serving their interests. Economists call this the sunk cost fallacy, but in career contexts, it becomes a psychological prison. A 45-year-old marketing manager who hates her job might feel trapped, not because she lacks alternatives, but because leaving would mean wasting 20 years of experience. The time already invested becomes justification for continuing to invest time, even when the returns are diminishing or negative. This psychological mechanism helps explain why so many people remain in jobs that drain their energy and stunt their growth. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave, not because external barriers increase, but because the psychological cost of admitting mistake compounds over time. Modern work culture exploits our evolved tendency to measure ourselves against peers. Social media amplifies this by providing constant exposure to others' professional achievements, creating what researchers call compare and despair cycles. But here's the cruel irony: the status markers we're encouraged to pursue, job titles, salary figures, corporate benefits, often correlate negatively with actual life satisfaction and meaningful accomplishment. We're competing for prizes that don't actually make us happy, in games we never consciously chose to play. Studies consistently show that beyond meeting basic needs, income increases provide diminishing returns on well-being, while factors like autonomy, mastery, and purpose matter far more for long-term satisfaction. Yet our economic system incentivizes the opposite prioritization. As we examine these mechanisms, it's worth asking yourself some uncomfortable questions. How many of your career decisions were made because you genuinely wanted specific outcomes, versus because you felt you should want them? If money weren't a factor, what would you spend your time doing? How much of your current work resembles that vision? When you imagine explaining your job to your 10-year-old self, does it sound exciting and meaningful? Or do you find yourself making excuses for why adults have to do things they don't enjoy? How much of your identity is wrapped up in your job title or employer? What would be left if those external markers disappeared? These questions aren't meant to induce guilt or despair, but to create space for honest self-reflection. Only by understanding our own psychological relationship to work can we begin to imagine different arrangements. The evidence is overwhelming. Our current work systems are failing to serve human flourishing while concentrating wealth and power in fewer hands. But recognizing the problem is just the beginning. The question becomes, what would better systems look like, and how might we transition toward them? Before we dismiss the 9-to-5 system entirely, intellectual honesty demands we examine its genuine benefits. The strongest defense isn't corporate propaganda. It's the real human needs that traditional employment sometimes meets. For millions of people, particularly those supporting families or managing health conditions, employment provides crucial stability. A steady paycheck enables long-term planning. Employer-sponsored health insurance, despite its flaws, offers protection from medical bankruptcy that freelancers and entrepreneurs often lack. Consider a single mother working as a nurse. Her hospital job provides not just income, but health coverage for her children, predictable scheduling that allows childcare planning, and retirement benefits that would be difficult to replicate independently. For her, the trade-off between autonomy and security might genuinely favor traditional employment. Some personalities thrive within clear structures and defined expectations. Research in organizational psychology shows that certain individuals experience anxiety when faced with too much autonomy or ambiguous goals. For these workers, the 9-to-5 framework provides psychological comfort rather than constraint. The predictability of traditional employment can also reduce what psychologists call decision fatigue. When your schedule, priorities, and methods are predetermined, mental energy is freed for other aspects of life. This isn't always exploitation. Sometimes it's genuinely helpful structure. Certain industries genuinely require synchronized schedules and institutional consistency. Healthcare systems need 24/7 coverage with coordinated handoffs between shifts. Educational institutions benefit from shared calendars and collaborative planning. Infrastructure maintenance requires teams working in sequence. These coordination needs don't automatically justify exploitative conditions, but they do suggest that some form of structured, interdependent work arrangements will always be necessary for complex societies. Recognizing the 9-to-5 trap doesn't require immediate escape. It requires conscious navigation and gradual liberation. The first step is psychological. Divorcing your self-worth from external markers like job titles, salary figures, or corporate advancement. This isn't about lowering standards. It's about choosing standards that actually correlate with human flourishing. Instead of asking, how can I earn more money? Or how can I get promoted? Try asking, what work would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? Or what problems am I uniquely positioned to solve? These questions orient toward intrinsic motivation rather than external validation. Research by psychologist Tim Kasser consistently shows that people who prioritize intrinsic goals, personal growth, meaningful relationships, community contribution report higher life satisfaction than those focused on extrinsic goals like wealth, fame, or status. Rather than quitting immediately, many people find freedom by gradually building alternatives alongside traditional employment. Side projects, creative pursuits, and skill development can serve as both psychological relief and practical preparation for different arrangements. The key is choosing projects based on personal interest and potential value creation, rather than immediate monetization. A software engineer might start writing fiction, not because it pays well initially, but because it develops different capacities and creates potential future income streams. This approach recognizes that most people can't simply opt out of economic systems overnight, but can begin cultivating alternatives that might eventually support different choices. Within traditional employment, it's often possible to negotiate for increased autonomy, even when salary increases aren't available. Remote work options, flexible scheduling, project-based responsibilities, and results-oriented evaluation can significantly improve work experience without changing fundamental employment structure. The psychological research is clear. Autonomy matters more for long-term satisfaction than marginal income increases above basic needs. A $5,000 salary increase might provide temporary satisfaction, but the ability to control when and how you work provides ongoing well-being benefits. Begin tracking how you actually spend your time, not just work hours, but all waking hours. Most people discover they're unconsciously trading time for convenience, distraction, or social obligation in ways that don't align with their stated values. A time audit might reveal that you spend more hours consuming entertainment than pursuing creative projects, more time commuting than exercising, more time in meetings than in meaningful conversation. This awareness creates opportunities for small adjustments that gradually increase life satisfaction. Individual solutions matter, but systemic problems require systemic changes. Fortunately, evidence is accumulating that alternative arrangements often benefit both workers and productivity. The most extensive trial of reduced work hours occurred in Iceland between 2015 and 2019, involving 2,500 workers across multiple sectors. The results were remarkable. Productivity remained stable or increased in most workplaces, while worker well-being, work-life balance, and job satisfaction improved significantly. Similar trials in New Zealand, Belgium, and Scotland have produced comparable results. Microsoft Japan reported a 40% productivity increase after implementing a 4-day workweek. These outcomes challenge the fundamental assumption that more hours equal more value creation. The psychological mechanism appears to be what researchers call Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill available time. When time becomes constrained, people naturally eliminate low-value activities and focus on essential tasks. UBI experiments in Finland, Kenya, and Stockton, California provide evidence that unconditional income support doesn't reduce work motivation. It changes the quality and purpose of work people choose. Finland's 2-year UBI trial found that recipients were more likely to start businesses, pursue education, and engage in community work compared to control groups receiving traditional unemployment benefits. Rather than creating laziness, basic income security enabled people to take productive risks and pursue meaningful projects. The psychological effect appears to be the reduction of what researchers call scarcity mindset, the cognitive tunnel vision that occurs when basic needs feel threatened. When survival is secure, people make better long-term decisions and pursue intrinsically motivated activities. Companies like Netflix, Patagonia, and Buffer have experimented with results-only work environments where employees are evaluated based on outcomes rather than time spent. These arrangements often increase both productivity and worker satisfaction. The key insight is that knowledge work, which comprises an increasing share of economic activity, doesn't follow industrial logic where more input hours reliably produce more output. Creativity, problem-solving, and innovation often benefit from periods of rest, reflection, and unstructured exploration that traditional scheduling doesn't accommodate. The Mondragon Corporation in Spain demonstrates how worker-owned cooperatives can operate successfully at scale. With over 80,000 employee owners across multiple industries, Mondragon maintains democratic decision-making while competing effectively in global markets. Worker cooperatives typically show lower pay inequality, higher job satisfaction, and greater resilience during economic downturns compared to traditional corporations. They prove that business success doesn't require hierarchical control or wealth concentration. These solutions aren't mutually exclusive. Individual agency and structural change reinforce each other. As more people prioritize autonomy over income, demand increases for alternative arrangements. As alternative arrangements prove successful, they become more available to individuals seeking change. The transition requires both personal courage and collective organization. It means supporting businesses that prioritize worker well-being, advocating for policies that reduce economic insecurity, and gradually building parallel systems that serve human flourishing rather than just capital accumulation. Most importantly, it requires rejecting the false choice between security and freedom. The evidence shows that arrangements prioritizing human dignity often prove more productive and sustainable than those treating people as disposable resources. The question isn't whether change is possible. The question is whether we'll choose it. The landscape of work is changing rapidly, but not necessarily in liberating directions. The rise of the gig economy was supposed to represent freedom. Choose your hours, be your own boss, escape corporate constraints. Yet research reveals that most gig workers earn less than minimum wage when expenses are factored in, work longer hours than traditional employees, and lack basic protections like health insurance or retirement benefits. Uber drivers, DoorDash couriers, and TaskRabbit workers aren't entrepreneurs. They're piece-rate laborers in a system that's shifted all risks to individuals while concentrating profits among platform owners. The gig economy represents what labor historian Louis Hyman calls pseudo-entrepreneurship, all the insecurity of business ownership with none of the upside potential. Even remote work, celebrated as a pandemic-era liberation, often intensifies rather than reduces work's colonization of personal time. When your home becomes your office, when Slack notifications follow you to bed, when flexibility means being available 24/7, the boundaries between work and life don't disappear. They dissolve entirely in work's favor. These developments reveal something crucial about the 9-to-5 trap. It's not really about location or schedule. It's about the fundamental relationship between human time and economic value. Whether you're in a cubicle or a coffee shop, whether you work 9 to 5 or around the clock, if someone else determines how your productive energy gets used and who benefits from its output, the essential dynamic remains unchanged. The most sophisticated modern workplaces have learned to co-opt the language of liberation while intensifying control. Google offers nap pods and free meals, not to improve workers' lives, but to keep them on campus longer. Tech companies promote work-life integration, a euphemism for eliminating any separation between personal time and corporate demands. Silicon Valley culture celebrates passion and purpose in work. But these noble concepts get weaponized to justify unpaid overtime and emotional manipulation. When your job is supposedly your calling, saying no to additional demands becomes not just unprofessional, but personally authentic. This represents what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls burnout society, a system where people exploit themselves more efficiently than any external force could. The ultimate control isn't imposed from outside. It's internalized as personal responsibility for constant optimization and growth. Here's your challenge for this week, and it might be the most important thing you do. Conduct a completely honest audit of how you spend your time. Track everything for 7 days, not just work hours, but all your waking hours. How much time goes to work that aligns with your deepest values and interests, work that feels necessary but meaningless, commuting and work-related preparation, consuming media versus creating something original, relationships that energize versus drain you, activities you choose versus activities you feel obligated to do. Most people discover they're trading enormous amounts of irreplaceable time for outcomes they don't actually want, in service of goals they never consciously chose. But here's the crucial question. If you discovered that 60% of your waking hours serve someone else's priorities rather than your authentic goals, what would that knowledge demand of you? The hardest part isn't recognizing the trap. It's accepting responsibility for remaining in it once you see it clearly. Because at some point, continued participation becomes a choice, even when that choice feels constrained by mortgages, family obligations, and social expectations. Camus wrote that, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, but you have to choose the struggle. You have to decide whether you'll push the boulder because you're forced to, or because you've found meaning in the pushing itself." This doesn't mean everyone should quit their jobs tomorrow. It means everyone should consciously choose their relationship to work, rather than sleepwalking through decades of accumulated compromises. Some will choose traditional employment while maintaining psychological independence. Others will gradually build alternatives. Still others will discover that their current work, approached differently, actually serves their deepest values. The trap isn't any particular arrangement, it's unconsciousness about the arrangement you're in. We've traced the evolution from Plato's cave to Camus' boulder to our modern cubicles and home offices. We've seen how systems designed for industrial production have colonized human time and attention in increasingly sophisticated ways. We've examined evidence that alternative arrangements often serve both individual flourishing and collective productivity better than current defaults. But all of this analysis leads to a single, uncomfortable question that only you can answer. Will you trade your finite life hours for someone else's infinite profit? Or will you choose the harder path of authentic freedom? This isn't a question about career strategy or life optimization. It's a question about what kind of person you want to be and what kind of world you want to help create. Because here's what the time audit reveals. You have roughly 16 waking hours per day, about 6,000 hours per year, maybe 300,000 hours in your adult lifetime, if you're fortunate. Every hour you trade away is gone forever. Every day you spend serving priorities that aren't genuinely yours is a day you don't get back. The system tells you this is mature, responsible, realistic. But what if it's actually the ultimate immaturity? The abdication of your responsibility to live intentionally and contribute meaningfully to the world. Right now, as you're watching this, you're making a choice about how to spend this particular moment of your irreplaceable life. You could click away, scroll to something easier, return to the comfortable distractions that make time pass without demanding anything of you. Or you could sit with the discomfort of these questions. You could begin the difficult work of examining your own relationship to time, meaning, and authentic choice. You could start designing a life that serves your deepest values rather than someone else's profit margins. The boulder is waiting, the cave entrance is visible. The choice, as always, is yours. But choose consciously. Choose with full awareness of what you're trading away and what you're moving toward. Because the unexamined life isn't just not worth living. It's not really living at all. What will you choose?